Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Every Now and Then. My name is Brian Smith, and we're going to continue with part 2 now. This is our second and final installment of the Jeffrey McDonald murder case that happened on February 16th and 17th of 1970, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And in part 1, I gave the background of the tragic case. Very difficult to talk about because of the circumstances. Jeffrey McDonald was an up-and-coming surgeon. He was stationed at Fort Bragg. He had been there about 8 months. A hard worker, it seemed like, very well liked by everyone who came in contact with him. His wife, Colette, was several months pregnant with their third child. And as I stated in the first podcast episode, on the morning of February 17th, when MPs arrived and the EMS squad, Colette and the two young daughters, Kristen, the youngest, and Kimberly, were found murdered in their beds. Now, they probably weren't murdered while in their bed, but that's where they were found. And Jeffrey McDonald was found lying head down, his arm across his wife's chest like he was crying on her shoulder, and he appeared to be unconscious, although he had just made 2 phone calls a few minutes earlier, and then suddenly was found unconscious on top of her in a brutal crime scene with blood everywhere. And I went over the fact that his statement of what happened, where he was attacked by intruders, did not line up with the evidence at all. I'm going to talk about a few things. This is the most litigated case in American history. Many books have been written about this case, but the most famous was the book by Joe McGinnis, Fatal Vision, which I think is a perfect title. It's one of my favorite books on true crime. The miniseries came out in 1984, and it was, I believe, #1 for the year. And so it was in the news quite a bit. First aired November 18th, 1984. And again, it's based on the best-selling book by Joe McGinnis. As I stated in part 1, McDonald was found not liable for the murder. He was then discharged honorably by the Army. Went out to renew his life, put all the rumors and allegations behind him, and he went on really what today would be described as a media blitz, where he actually went on one of the top talk shows of 1970, the Dick Cavett Show. In December of 1970, this is a suspected murderer of his family being introduced to music and applause.
My next guest is Dr. Jeffrey McDonald. I hope this isn't too painful for you.
My wife came home and we had a before bedtime drink really, and watched the beginning of a late night talk show.
He knew how to do it, as we say in the talk show trade. He knew how to handle himself. His affect is wrong, totally wrong. My affect was, gee, to find your wife and kids murdered. And even his answer to that was something like, hey, yeah, isn't that something? Almost sounded like Bob Hope.
There were people in the Army who wanted a court-martial, regardless of any evidence.
Where are these investigators now who did the original?
Well, most of them have been transferred. It's the Army way of handling things. If someone really fouls up, you either give them a medal or you transfer them.
It's one of those situations where you have someone suspected of murder because he was in the house during the so-called attack, and there's an old saying that when there's dead bodies in a house, the first people you investigate are the ones that are still breathing. And again, to enter the stage to applause and music when you are suspected of being a triple murderer, really 4 murders, because the unborn child was also close to being born. I'm going to move away from that. April 6th of 1970, McDonald went into the CID office, that's the Criminal Investigative Department of the Army, wanting some of his personal effects given back to him, a stereo and TV. He was moving on with his life, and that is what he was requesting. But they went ahead and, without his being aware of it, sat him down, turned a tape recorder on, and wanted him to go ahead and to tell them exactly what happened that night. This was actually on the recording, so I'm going to, of course, read what he said. I would love to hear the recording, but it's not available. I know it's out there, but it's not for the public domain. When asked what happened, here was what he said. Let's see. Monday night, my wife went to bed and I was reading, and I went to bed about somewhere around 2 o'clock. I really don't know. I was reading on the couch, and my little girl Christy had gone into bed with my wife, and I went in to go to bed, and the bed was wet. She had wet the bed on my side, so I brought her into her own room, and I don't remember if I changed her or not. Gave her a bottle and went out on the couch because my bed was wet. Now that's the first part of the statement. I'm using the analysis of statement analysis expert Mark McClish, who does a tremendous job analyzing whether people are lying or not by their words. I put a lot of stock into words. They have a meaning, but there's a lot of leakage sometimes where people subconsciously will give away their true feelings and their true motives. People are really not very good liars, and our brains aren't really wired that way to lie. So when that happens, subconsciously things come out. So in that first statement, McDonald does not include his wife by name. If you are talking about someone close to you, you're going to introduce them by their name. You're going to say their name. That applies when you're talking about anything, whether you're writing it or you're introducing a story. It's very rude, and something's not right about the fact that he did not say Colette. He just said my wife. So that's an indication, according to McClish, that there's tension in that relationship. He mentions 2 a.m. is when he went to bed, but he says, I really don't know. The word really is a word that indicates untruthfulness. When someone says, well, I really don't know, I really honestly, truthfully think this. That's deceptive, and deceptive people will try to convince you they're telling the truth. And also, talking about the baby, he said, gave her a bottle. Who gave her a bottle? But he didn't use the pronoun I. And according to McClish, in statement analysis, nothing is understood. We believe what people tell us. He said he gave her a bottle, but if she was dead at the point he gave her a bottle, you could see why he did not say, I gave her a bottle. He just said, gave her a bottle. He also said that her bed was wet. She had wet the bed. I don't remember if I changed her or not. Now, what father would have a baby 2 years old and not change her diaper? Not even address that. So that was something else that really did not make any sense. So we're going to go on to his statement. I went to sleep on the couch, and the next thing I know, I heard some screaming, at least my wife, but I thought I heard Kimmy, my oldest daughter, screaming also, and I sat up. The kitchen light was on, and I saw some people at the foot of the bed. So I don't know if I really said anything or if I was getting ready to say something. This happened real fast. You know, when you talk about it, it sounds like it took forever, but it didn't take forever. So in that statement, he says phrases like, the next thing I know, the next thing I remember. Those are usually used to conceal information, according to Mark McClish. McDonald could have said, I went to sleep on the couch, I woke up hearing my wife screaming, but he didn't say that. The next thing I remember. He describes the killers as people. That's a very polite term for someone who slaughtered your family. He also said people were at the foot of the bed. Was that a Freudian slip? Was that really his bed? So he said he went to the couch, and then he said, I woke up at the foot of the bed. So I think that was a slip. That was leakage. That when the altercation occurred, he was at the foot of his bed with his family. Deceptive people will also use the phrase "you know" to get you to believe their story. And he says that quite a bit, you know. They expect you to take for granted what they are saying is the truth, but the problem is it's not the truth. So again, he goes on to say, and so I sat up, and at first I thought I just could see three people, and I don't know if I heard the girl first, or I think I saw her first. I think two of the men separated, sort of at the end of my couch, and all I saw was some people, really. Now there his mind's really getting jumbled. And he's on the hot seat, and he's getting flustered, obviously, and his thoughts are getting jumbled. So the phrase he says, "at first I thought," means he had a second thought, which he does not share with us. So he's got a lot of thoughts running through his head there. He said, "I saw three men," and that's a liar's number, according to Mark McClish. When deceptive people have to come up with a number, they will often use the number 3. And he said phrases, "I think," and "sort of." When you say "sort of," as he does, he's not committed to his story at all. He also talks about two of the men separating. He said, "I think two of the men separated sort of at the end of my couch." Now, what does that mean? Sort of really means it kind of happened or it never happened. And how can two men separate sort of at the end of the couch? So again, he's not committed to his story at all. He could see three people. Let's count them. He mentions he heard the girl first. That's one. Then he states two of the men separated. That's 2 and 3. However, if two of the men separated, that implies at least one of the men was present who did not separate. So he's contradicting himself all over the place, and he adds the word "really," which is a word that indicates he's not being truthful. So let's go on. And this guy started walking down between the coffee table and the couch, and he raised something over his head. Now this was a 8-foot ceiling. He raises a club over his head. Now there's no markings on the ceiling from that club he had. Back to what he said. He just sort of all together, I just got a glance of this girl with kind of a light on her face. I don't know if it was a flashlight or a candle, but it looked to me like she was holding something. And I just remember that my instinctive thought was that she's holding a candle. What is she holding a candle for? But she said before I was hit the first time, "Kill the pigs, acid's groovy." And that's all I think I heard before I was hit the first time and the guy hit me in the head. So he's all over the place. When he first started to tell his story, he said, "Well, let's see." In other words, let's see what I can come up with, and let's see what this imagination of mine is going to come up with. Because when you say "let's see," that's a little peculiar. It should be full of his mind what really, really happened. So this guy started walking. He says walking toward me. And that's very casual for someone who is in your house attacking you. If you have a struggle in your home, you would expect to hear language such as "he ran toward me," or "he got very aggressive and came at me." Saying he started to walk toward me, or saying he walked, is very strange. He just sort of all together. Again, that's a very jumbled statement. He's really flustered here. He changes his thoughts, and then he begins talking about the girl without even completing his thoughts. And then he goes on and on, about an hour. And as you can see, he was very flustered. Conversation with the CID had a lot of holes in it. He said later that he felt like he was ambushed, didn't know that they were going to ask him anything. I guess he thought he was in a home where 3 people were murdered, and he didn't have to give an account of himself. And also his father-in-law, Freddie Kassab, who first was his greatest proponent, started reading the evidence and reading things where MacDonald was inconsistent and there was holes in his story. He asked for several weeks for the transcripts of the trial, and he finally got them, I believe, on Christmas Day, 1970, 10 months after the murder. He had backed him to the hilt. He was obsessed with the transcripts. He started to change his mind and really became one of the heroes of this story. He was finally convinced that MacDonald killed his family and lied about it, covered it up. and wanted to get out of North Carolina, move to New York and then to California and have a new life where he could have a fairy tale dating all the women he could, be a doctor in a reputable hospital and a boat, and take vacations around the world, which is what he ultimately did for a while. And again, this is a very complicated, layered case. This was not someone who was considered a druggie or someone who was not intelligent. Very intelligent. He did his undergraduate work at Princeton. He joined the Army, was commissioned as a captain, and was considered very good at what he did. So it's a mystery what really occurred that night. MacDonald did polygraph exam in the spring of 1970. The results were deemed inconclusive. And MacDonald told the polygraph expert John Reed that his results were poor due to the fact that he was frantic with worry. Again, that's leakage. Why would he be frantic of worry if he didn't do it? Weeks later, polygraph expert Cleve Baxter administered a polygraph exam to MacDonald. Baxter concluded that MacDonald flunked the exam. 1985, polygraph expert David Raskin administered one. Now this, of course, is 15 years after the fact. It's a little bit easier to have your emotions in check. It was concluded that he had passed that exam. He refused to take a polygraph exam for the CID in 1970. He refused again in 1973. Why is he refusing? So finally, a friend of MacDonald's approached famed attorney Vincent Bugliosi, of course the lawyer who convicted Charles Manson, and he wanted Vincent Bugliosi to represent MacDonald. One of Bugliosi's stipulations was that MacDonald must take a polygraph exam. So he was going to get one of the best defense attorneys in the country at that time. MacDonald refused to take a polygraph exam. And that resulted in Bugliosi refusing to represent MacDonald. Now, I don't really want to say too much about Helena Stokely. She really threw the monkey wrench into this situation. She was a mentally psychotic person, had multiple personalities, said she was there, then she wasn't there, really couldn't remember that night if she was there or not. One of the MPs, who will remain nameless, mentioned that he saw someone like her standing with a hat and boots in a pouring down rain at 4 o'clock in the morning, which I find that hard to believe. So I'm not sure why he even brought that up. And of course, she had been an excessive drug user, and she also took polygraphs, and she basically failed every single one. So we can put that to bed. That's a moot point about Helena Stokely, even though she's brought up constantly as a witness. There's just no credible evidence saying she was. If she was there, why wasn't she prosecuted and put in prison? I don't want to get too graphic, but I want to give the timeline, what many interpret as the physical evidence demonstrated in this case. So this is what many people, including myself, think this is the timeline. And this is based on a lot of research, reading Fatal Vision many times. In the early morning hours of February 17, 1970, Colette and Jeffrey McDonald got into a heated argument in the master bedroom. The verbal confrontation escalates and McDonald punches Colette in the face. So why did he do that? There is evidence that McDonald was molesting his oldest daughter, Kimberly, and she was the one that was in the bed. The blood work and the urine proved that it was Kimberly in the bed. That was her urine, not Kristen. But McDonald was adamant that it was Kristen. But Kimberly was in the bed, and she was 6 years old. Why was she wetting the bed? There was indication that it was because she was being molested, but it can't be proven. But that's part of possibly what Colette was saying that angered her. So after Colette was punched in the face, Colette grabs a hairbrush and uses it to strike her husband over the left eye. Now, the area over McDonald's left eye did have a bruise when he was taken to the hospital. and there was slight swelling. Colette then touches her bloody face with her hand because he punched her right square in the face, unaware that her husband's anger was about to turn into blind rage. Instinctively, she reaches out, grabs his pajama top by the yoke or the front portion of the top, and as they grapple, some of that blood from Colette's face splatters on her husband's pajama top. It's clearly in the evidence. Colette pulls straight down on the front portion of the pajama top as her husband spins to his right, and that results in that 72-inch tear down the left front seam and left sleeve. It's clearly there on the evidence. This tearing action bisects the 4 stains on the pajama top formed in Colette's blood. During this grappling phase, Colette also managed to use her left hand to rip out a hair from her husband's left arm. That hair was found in her hand during the autopsy, and it was found to be from Jeffrey McDonald. Once the tearing of the top is complete, dozens of fibers from the left front seam and left sleeve fall to the carpet in the master bedroom. That pocket for the pajama top is completely dislodged from the garment and falls onto the upturned portion of the throw rug. Then McDonald hits Colette in the face a second time in order to free himself from her grasp. He then finds a wooden club that's holding up a corner portion of the master bed footboard and thrusts one end of the club into her chest. This thrusting motion formed a large patterned bruise on his wife's chest, found during the autopsy. Oldest daughter Kimberly enters the master bedroom, and her father immediately turns and hits his daughter with the club in the left side of her face. Some people think this was accidental. This was such a savage blow that it resulted in Kimberly's blood being spattered on the master bedroom door frame, and she immediately falls to the floor near the entrance of the master bedroom. Blood from Kimberly's broken nose and gaping wound on her shattered left cheekbone form a 6-inch circle of blood near the entrance of the bedroom. You could even see her spinal fluid. It was also found on the doorway. That's how hard he hit her. That was not an accident. Colette obtained a Geneva forged knife and sliced her husband's abdomen, resulting in an upside-down V that was found on his abdomen. Very superficial. McDonald retaliates with 2 brutal blows with the club to Colette's head. One blow struck Colette on the left temple and the other on the right temple. Both blows tore her skin and spattered her blood inside the closet, on the carpet near the footboard of the master bed, and on top of the master bed. She was knocked completely unconscious by these 2 blows, and she came to rest on the master bedroom floor between the closet and the footboard. Why was he in such a rage? Did it have to do with the fact that he was asked about the molestation of Kimberly? And then he took it out on Kimberly as well. McDonald assumed that his wife and daughter are dead or near death. He picks up Kimberly in the blue bedsheet and begins to carry her back to the bedroom, her bedroom. The direct contact between Kimberly and McDonald result in the transfer of Kimberly's blood to the McDonald pajama top and to the blue bedsheet. McDonald places Kimberly in her bed and begins to adjust her body in a sleeping position. I'm not sure why he did that. During this adjustment process, 14 fibers from his torn pajama top fall on top of her bed. A single pajama fiber is moved under her pillow, and a 20-inch yarn from his pajama top falls on top of that same pillow. McDonald then obtains the club and strikes Kimberly with 2 brutal blows to the right side of her face. Cast-off blood from both Colette and Kimberly is sprayed on the wall, and Kimberly's blood is spattered onto the ceiling. He then covers Kimberly's body with her blanket and bed covers. He then decides to go to the kitchen to retrieve the old hickory knife. He walks into Kristen's room and stabs her in the chest as she lay in her bed, thrusts her hands out to defend herself because she saw him coming. She saw her killer. That resulted in a fiber from her father's pajama top being lodged under her fingernail and several knife cuts on her hands. MacDonald then grabs Kristen by the collar portion of her pajama top, pulls her face down towards the edge of the bed. He stabs her in the back 12 times with such force that 2 of the stab wounds penetrate her heart. He places his daughter back into a sleeping position on her bed. 2 fibers from his torn pajama top fall within her body outline, and he subsequently places the top sheet over a portion of her body. MacDonald hears Colette stagger into Kristen's room. Colette briefly touches Kristen's body, transferring small traces of Kristen's blood to her hands. MacDonald enters Kristen's room with a club in his hand. He hits her under the chin with the club. The force of the blow lifts Colette off her feet and propels her over Kristen's body. Colette places her arms in front of her face in an attempt to ward off the overhand blows from the club. Colette's arms are shattered and she receives 2 more vicious blows to the head. One of the blows fractures her skull. Cast-off blood from Colette is sprayed on the wall. Her upper body slumps forward and she bleeds directly onto Kristen's bottom sheet. That's the evidence they found. You get an idea how brutal this was. MacDonald then delicately stabbed himself with a scalpel blade. It did result in blood dripping onto the front and right side of the bathroom sink. He takes some time to gather himself, both mentally and physically, before he called for assistance. His phone calls were logged at 3:40 and 3:42. MPs got there, all of a sudden he's unconscious. He also made sure that he had different instruments to stab everyone. He used an ice pick to stab Colette 21 times. 3 different weapons were used. This is a hideous story to talk about, but the evidence was his downfall. The miracle was everyone in that household had a different blood type, and that's how they were able to match everything that he did, what room he went into, and where everyone died. Everyone had a different blood type, which is a miracle. As you can see, some of the details are just too graphic for this podcast. MacDonald was taken to Womack Army Medical Center. The medical staff discovered the wounds MacDonald had suffered were much less numerous and much less severe than those inflicted upon his wife and children. He had cuts, bruises, fingernail scratches to his face and chest. None of these wounds were life-threatening, didn't even require stitches. MacDonald was also found to have a mild concussion. He had a single stab wound between 2 ribs of the right torso. The wound was described by a staff surgeon as a clean, small, sharp incision, measuring 5/8 of an inch in depth, and it caused his lung to partially collapse. He was released from the hospital after 9 days, and I'm not even sure it should have taken that long. As the Army investigators studied the physical evidence, the Army CID quickly came to disbelieve MacDonald's account, and they found very little evidence to support his version of the events. Although MacDonald was trained in unarmed combat, the living room where he had supposedly fought for his life against 3 armed assailants showed few signs of a struggle apart from the coffee table that had been knocked onto its side with a pile of magazines beneath the edge and a flower pot that had fallen to the floor. They questioned MacDonald's neighbors, and it revealed that they heard no sounds of a struggle, no disturbance within the household in the early hours, but they did hear Colette shouting in a loud and angry voice. A 16-year-old daughter of these neighbors, who occasionally babysat for the family, informed investigators the 2 had seemed very stern and indifferent to each other in the month prior to the murders. Less than a week after the murders, the Fort Bragg Provost Marshal had advised the FBI to discontinue their search for 4 intruders. In In addition to the lack of damage to the inside of the house, no fibers from McDonald's torn pajama top were found in the living room where he claimed the garment had been torn in his struggle with the intruders. However, fibers from the pajama top were found beneath Colette's body and in the bedroom of both of his daughters. One fiber from his garment was also found under Kristen's fingernail. Blood-stained splinters recovered from all three bedrooms of the apartment, but not the room where McDonald claimed he had been attacked. No blood or fingerprints were found on either the telephone McDonald claimed to have used. Furthermore, the blood-stained tip of a surgical glove was found beneath the headboard where the blood inscription was written. This glove was identical in composition to a medical supply McDonald had kept in the kitchen. In other words, if it was an intruder, they wore surgical gloves to write pig on the headboard. Although it had rained the night of February 16th and 17th, and McDonald claimed that the female intruder's boots were all wet, the sole footprint found at the scene was a bloody bare footprint located in Kristen's bedroom, which ended up being determined to belong to Jeffrey McDonald. The forensic analysis testing of the blood, hair, and fiber from 544 Castle Drive contradicted all of McDonald's accounts of his movements and further convinced investigators of his guilt. For example, Kimberly's blood was found on his pajama top, even though McDonald claimed he was not wearing the garment while in her room attempting resuscitation. McDonald's own blood was located in significant quantities in only two locations: the front of the kitchen cabinet containing rubber gloves and upon the right side of a hallway bathroom sink. Investigators also wondered why Colette's blood was found in Kristen's room, although all three victims were found in separate rooms, suggesting they had been attacked separately. Moreover, although blood evidence indicated Kimberly had been attacked as she entered the master bedroom, investigators questioned why home intruders would bother to carry her back to her bedroom to continue their attack. And as I said, all four members of the McDonald family had different blood types. This is a statistical anomaly, but it assisted investigators in determining the movements of each member of the household and their subsequent theory as a likely scenario of the unfolding events. Because of the blood typing, it was determined without a shadow of a doubt that an argument between McDonald and Colette began in the master bedroom, probably over the issue of the bed being wet. And again, McDonald said Kristen was the one who wet the bed. However, the urine tested belonged to Kimberly. The great investigators of this case were key to solving the crime. William Ivory, investigator Robert Shaw, investigator Franz Grebner helped solve the case. In his opening statement to the jury, James Blackburn said, "We believe that the physical evidence points to the fact that one person, not 2, 3, 4, or more, killed Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen. And that person is the defendant." Almost 10 years of wading through appeals, McDonald was finally convicted on August 29, 1979. A lot of the credit went to Fred Kassab, who did everything he could to make sure that justice prevailed. June 1979, McDonald had invited author Joe McGinnis to write a book about his case. Initially, he was unsure about McDonald's guilt or innocence, but he agreed to his request. McGinnis wrote Fatal Vision, ultimately portrayed McDonald as a narcissistic sociopath who was guilty of murdering his family and who believed in his ongoing capabilities to deceive both legal personnel and personal acquaintances. Fatal Vision also alleged a possible motive for the killings, as McDonald was regularly taking the amphetamine esketrol in an effort to lose weight. McGinnis suggested that McDonald may have murdered his family in a spur-of-the-moment fit of psychotic rage as a result of his frequent consumption of amphetamines. Furthermore, the book emphasized the fact that McDonald worked extremely long hours in several medical roles in 1969 and 70, and his extensive social and family commitments resulted in his suffering from an increasing lack of sleep. Now, there is a possibility that that was part of what caused this psychotic attack, and I also think there must be more emphasis on the fact that Colette may have accused him of having an inappropriate relationship with his daughter, Kimberly. But we will never know, as McDonald will never confess to any wrongdoing. We can go on and on as far as this case. It is multi-layered. Freddie Kassab recorded a message on his tape recorder stating he wished the recording to be played at any future parole hearing, which it was. In that recorded message, Kassab said, "I want to be sure he serves out his sentence the way it should be served out. I don't want him walking the streets." The Kassabs died in the early 1990s. Jeffrey McDonald has given many interviews, always claiming his innocence. He is, as of 2025, still behind bars. Jeffrey McDonald was born October 12, 1943. He's 2 years old. He is 82 years old. He has remarried in prison. The real tragedy is that this should never have happened. Every now and then we go back in time to reflect, to reminisce, and remember. Today was the conclusion of the two-part tragedy, the Jeffrey McDonald murder case. My name is Brian Smith, and we are history. Thank you for listening.